Greetings. Today I'll talk about one of the most important battles that took place during the early years of the American Revolution, the Battle of Sullivan's Island near Charleston, South Carolina. South Carolina at the time was the richest of the 13 colonies and supplied most of the rice and indigo for the colonies. Before starting, I want to announce that my book, The American Revolution 1776, is now available in softbound, ebook, and audiobook formats on Amazon and many other online booksellers. Listeners will find a link to the book in the description of this podcast. After several aborted attempts, due to unfavorable winds and tides, British Admiral Parker managed to maneuver his fleet into position to attack Fort Sullivan in Charleston Harbor on June 28, 1776. Commodore Parker had to have the cannons removed from two of the largest warships to allow them to pass over the shoals that led to the harbor. The British had two 50-gun warships, including leading the fleet, Parker's flagship, the HMS Bristol, and the HMS Experiment. The flotilla also had 6 frigates that had been between 20 and 28 guns each. There were 3 smaller ships that carried between 6 and 8 guns each. The flotilla had 30 transports to ferry invasion troops ashore. The combined firepower of this fleet was well over 250 guns. British strength at the time of the battle consisted of the 15th, 28th, 33rd, 37th, 54th, and the 57th Regiments, and part of the 46th Regiment. British were short on supplies, however, and the crews of the ship had subsisted on 2/3 rations for the 4 weeks they had been deployed. They had had no meat during that time. Thus, many of them were weakened and too sick and unfit to man their stations. With some difficulty, Parker found 50 sailors fit enough to man the troop transporters that would carry the British troops ashore. The Americans had removed all navigational aids like buoys that indicated water depth, etc. The British, hindered by inadequate charts of the complicated coastline, had to waste valuable time sounding the bay and placing buoys. The South Carolinians had recruited 6 regiments of militia, as well as 3 companies of artillery, which totaled about 2,000 men. Continental troops on the battle site included 2 regiments of North Carolina and 1 Virginia regiment, with total another 2,000 men. The Charleston militia included 700 men. Thus, the Americans had about 6,500 soldiers to counter the British threat. Admiral Parker did not anticipate any problems capturing Fort Sullivan. He expected that once his naval guns had taken out the fort's cannon, he could land seamen and marines to take the fort and hold it until General Clinton's troop could take possession. He planned to move 3 of his frigates into positions to control key roads around the fort and prevent Patriot forces from deploying fireships to disrupt his fleet. The frigate's position would also allow him to use a ship's guns to keep defenders from abandoning the fort after the British began firing. On the morning of the attack, Colonel Moultrie had about 435 men inside the fort to defend it from the British attack. Americans had also deployed another 780 soldiers to defend the northern end of the island against Clinton's expected attempt to land troops on the island. Moultrie had dug a morass in the center of the fort to observe British cannon fire. Only the south and north walls were completely done. The fort had 31 cannon, but only had enough gunpowder for 35 rounds for each cannon. The cannon ranged from French 28-pounders to many smaller ones. Admiral Parker finished the final positioning of his troops by 9 o'clock a.m. When the last ship moved into position, the gunner fired a signal shot, indicating that all was ready. Sometime around 10:30 a.m., Parker ordered the cannonade to begin, with British bomb ketch Thunder opening the fire first. Immediately after the Thunder opened fire, 3 other ships, the 50-gun Bristol, the 50-gun Experiment, and the 28-gun Active, and the 28-gun Sullivan, added to the crescendo. The cannonade had little effect as the cannonballs bounced off the spongy palmetto wood. The morass in the center of the fort swallowed up most of the cannonballs that entered the fort, preventing the explosions that would cause a lot of damage. With limited gunpowder available, Moultrie had ordered his gunners to fire only after careful aiming. Thus, Moultrie's cannon returned fire in a slow, deliberate manner. They used chain shot, which consists of 2 cannonballs halves held together with a short with a short length of chain to fire into the rigging of the British ships. When Parker tried to land 2 boatloads of men to attack the island, the defender used a cannon loaded with grape shot to repel the attack. Frigates Parker had deployed to harass the defenders and prevent them from retreating to the fort ran aground. The British managed to free 2 of the ships but had to burn the 3rd. Several thousand cannon shots hit the fort. However, the palmetto logs did not splinter. The 16-foot sandberry between the 2 log balls played an important role in absorbing the fury of the attack. Parker's fleet did not fare well either. American cannon fire cut the anchor chains of 2 of the ships, allowing them to drift lengthwise to the defenders' fire. The American fired 2 rounds that hit the ship. The Americans fired 2 rounds that hit the stern of the ship. The cannonballs careened down the entire length of the ships, causing much damage and killing or maiming many sailors. The chain shot continued, cutting away the ship's rigging. General Lee visited the fort in the afternoon, noted that the defenders were doing well, and sent another 700 pounds of gunpowder to the fort. It appears the fort was well supplied with cannonballs. The slow, deliberate fire of Moultrie's guns had a devastating effect on the British ships. Apparently, Parker had not anticipated the precise cannon fire of the American gunners, nor did he expect the fort to survive his bombardment. He had anchored his ships too close, with the effect that the American guns inflicted heavy damage and caused much loss of life. He continued the battle until about 11 p.m. that night. At that point, he broke off the engagement and had his ships sail out of range of the American guns. British casualties included 40 dead and 71 wounded. American casualties were 17 dead and 20 wounded. The British fleet limped off and remained for several weeks, repairing their ships while Parker and Clinton decided upon a course of action. At length, the fleet departed, heading to New York, where they would take part in the attack on that city. Word of the first major victory of the fledgling War of Independence filtered back to Philadelphia. An exuberant Congress thanked Fort Moultrie's defenders and named the fort after its commander, Colonel William Moultrie. The British would not return to attack Charleston again until 1780. Other events of the week included: on June 28, 1776, the Maryland Provincial Congress held an emergency meeting during which they rescinded their order to their delegates to the Continental Congress to oppose independence. The Provincial Congress voted to support independence, becoming the 12th state to support the proposal. The 5th Virginia Convention convened on May the 6th, 1776, and continued in session through July the 5th, 1776. On June the 12th, the convention adopted the Declaration of Rights, which defined individual rights in the colony. The document passed on June 29th established a framework of government for the new state that replaced their subservience to England by adopting this new constitution. Virginia essentially became an independent state. The British fleet arrives off Staten Island on June the 29th, 1776. The long-anticipated arrival of the British fleet in New York Harbor occurred when British General Richard Howe arrived in lower New York Bay. Sentinels keeping watch on the east side of Staten Island notified General George Washington by signaling the arrival of the fleet. By day's end, over 45 British ships had arrived to drop anchor just off Staten Island. Washington reported the occurrence in a letter to John Hancock, the President of Congress, the same day. The New York Provincial Congress abandoned New York on June the 30th, 1776. With the approach of the British fleet, the New York Provincial Congress abandoned New York. It would next meet on July the 9th, 1776, in White Plains, New York. By late June and early July, the retreating American army had reached Crown Point and Fort Ticonderoga in New York, which is about 100 miles south of Montreal on Lake Champlain. Meanwhile, the British, commanded by General Guy Carleton, had taken up positions further up the Richelieu River on the northern part of Lake Champlain. Both the American forces and the British forces knew that the Lake Champlain was an important strategic point. Whoever controlled the lake controlled eastern New York and western New Hampshire. Cherokee war parties began raiding the South Carolina frontier on July the 1st, 1779. Settlers pushing into Kentucky and the frontier areas of South Carolina had encroached on Cherokee land. The Cherokee chief Dragging Canoe urged his tribe to drive the settlers out. The British governor of Detroit had encouraged an entourage of Shawnee, Lenape, Iroquois, and Ottawa and other tribes to travel to South Carolina to join the Cherokees in a war against the settlers. Upon arrival of the British fleet, General Washington had requested Congress to send more reinforcements. General Nathaniel Hurd arrived on July the 2nd with his brigade, the first large force to arrive from the colonies from the south. As you can see, I have omitted the most important event of the week. I will publish a special edition on later this week that chronicles the Continental Congress treasonous act issuing the Declaration of Independence. I would encourage you to visit and subscribe to the Mossy Feet Wood Books YouTube channel for more great content. If you like my videos, please hit the like button. The more likes I get, the more YouTube will show it to other people, allowing me to grow the channel. I also invite you to visit my website, www.mossyfeetbooks.com. There you will find sample chapters, podcasts, a slew of content, and links to where you can buy my books. While visiting the website, you can subscribe to it and receive email notifications when I publish a new book or other content like this video and podcast. If you like what I'm doing, please purchase a book as it helps fund my work. I hope you enjoyed this